Hey everybody, Cody Shirk here. I've been a private investor internationally for almost 20 years now, and I tend to get a vibe on different trends depending on what is popular with public sentiment. And I've noticed over the past couple of years, and especially over the past 6 months, I've seen a lot of deal flow in the defense and aerospace industries. And I decided to do a deep dive on some data and share it with you so you can understand what's going on there, where the opportunities are, and what you can invest in right now. So let's dive in. So the best way to start on understanding what the funding is for defense startups and what's going on in the industry is to take a look at what the DoD, the Department of Defense, is actually doing. And they just released their report a couple months ago, actually about a month ago, for 2023. So it seems like it's really outdated, but it takes about a year for them to release this report. And it's a fantastic report. You can look at it yourself. But the thing to notice here is on their first page of the summary, the introduction, the DoD's budget authority increased from about 800 billion to just under 900 billion. This is almost exactly a 10% increase year over year. So the point is the DoD's budget has increased by 10% in 1 year. You could point to inflation or the rising costs of certain equipment, or maybe that there are more things that DoD is purchasing, but bigger picture, the DoD is spending a lot more money. And for startups in the defense sector, this is clearly bullish because the DoD wants to fund technologies, weapons, etc., that are going to help the U.S. and other militaries to fight wars. So this report is great. You can look over this yourself. It's like 100 pages or more. So I won't dive too deep into that. In that report, it talks about the industrial base policy and its strategic priorities. There's a very good graphic here that they produce and explains where funding is going, and a lot of it is to things you wouldn't assume. Obviously, there's missiles and munitions, but some of it's high-tech chips, microelectronics, and all types of abbreviations which I will not dive into here. But this report does do a pretty good job of explaining where they are spending money and where attention and capital is going. Now, there's been a lot of private reports. This one is put out by JP Morgan, and it dives into where DoD funding is going, where it's gone for the past decade, and where it's probably headed. And JP Morgan did a good job of identifying four main categories: advanced computing and software, sensing, connectivity and security, biotechnology, and autonomous systems. And I'm sure as you see these four categories, you can start to understand where drones fit in, where AI fits in, where biotechnology fits in with medicines, but also weapons. It's quite scary stuff if you think about it, because it really is 21st, maybe 22nd century type thinking when it comes to warfare. But this is where the funding is going. McKinsey also put out a pretty good report, and this graphic here shows how there's been three waves of startups within the defense world, and the trend is certainly increasing, not only in volume of deals, but also in the variety of studies that these different startups are focusing on, because it's not simply guns and airplanes and bombs anymore. It's really, really complex technologies, as you can see on this graphic: sensing, connectivity, biotechnology, which again, JP Morgan articulated, McKinsey is also here, autonomous systems, space technology. I've written in the past about how there's going to be wars in space in the future. Of course, Trump is famous for starting Space Force as another branch of the U.S. military. Here is a report from S&P Global. It shows PE and VC-backed funding rounds in global defense sector for the past 2 years. And you'll see there's a list of 10 companies here with details of the funding rounds. Of those 10, 8 are US-based. So on one hand, you could say US is leading the pack, which they are, meaning global funding going into defense investment. But also, to be fair, I want to be clear, the US does typically fund private companies versus other countries such as Russia, China, and other superpowers that fund companies and technologies through their government. So the US more likely to fund private initiatives, which will then transform into government usage, or the government will acquire that technology. But this graph here shows that the US is certainly sticking to that funding of private companies here. Anduril at the top of the list just had a huge financing round of $1.5 billion. I thought it would be important to show what's going on in Europe as well, because the US is actually funding European military tech startups as well. The Financial Times produced this, last month, to explain what is going on over there in Europe. The interesting part right here that I thought was notable was the funding amounts. You can see here this chart is rapidly expanding. In fact, 2024 funding to date is already more than 2023, and the projected total funding of 2024 is maybe not double, but close to it of what 2023 is. And I would say that is an indication of Europe's underinvestment in military and defense startups, but also the US's desire for Europe to catch up. And as you can see in this chart here, the amount of money for mega rounds going into startups is massive in Europe. Another interesting graphic here is showing where the funding is coming from in European defense tech venture capital funding. And here you can see that the dark blue is domestic. That's domestic money coming within Europe. And then the light blue is from the US. 2024 is a blowout year when it comes to US funding going to Europe to fund these startups. Moving over to Crunchbase, interesting that the number one defense tech investor since 2021 is A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz. And A16Z is a famous Silicon Valley investor. They are in all kinds of traditional tech companies, and now they're in defense investing. So it just shows the momentum and trends that are going on globally, but also within the tech startup world. You have some of the top VC firms here. Again, A16Z, 8VC, Alumni Ventures, Silent Ventures, Founders Fund, General Catalyst. These are all tier one VC funds, and they are very active in the defense tech space. Of course, they are in business to make money, and they see money to be made here. Two notable funding rounds that happened this year. This was back in July for Helsing. They raised at a $5.4 billion valuation. Remember, this is a private company, so we're talking multi-billion-dollar valuations for companies that are still private. To put that into context, there's many defense companies that trade publicly that are not even close to valued this much. So it just goes to show the investor appetite for defense startups, but also the fact that there are many defense startups that are valued in the billions of dollars that have not even gone public yet. And typically when a company does go public, valuation goes up even more because there's liquidity with the daily trading action of investors. Anduril is probably the most notable private defense company right now. They just raised $1.5 billion. So they raised that much. That's how much they're worth. You can see here in this article, this values them at $14 billion. And for comparison, the probably closest company to compare to Anduril, not exactly the same as Palantir. And Palantir is a publicly traded company, and it has ripped over the past year. It's up well over 100% because people want exposure to AI, which Palantir is focused on, but they also want exposure to companies helping militaries and defense operations, and Palantir absolutely is involved there. So I started this video out talking about how I'm personally seeing a lot of activity in the defense startup scene. I'm getting pitched a lot of deals, and I thought I'd show 3 companies that I've personally been pitched in the past year. I'm not going to share the deal metrics or numbers because those are confidential numbers and information, but I will share the company names. So the first one here is Raven, and they're modernizing composite manufacturing with breakthrough 3D printing. This obviously is targeted to the aerospace industry, but this is a type of technology or company that larger defense companies are very interested in, and governments are interested in, especially the US government, as they are trying to fuel their military industrial complex. Another one is Shield AI. You can look from their website here. Again, these companies you can check out right now. They're private, but you can go on these websites and learn all the information that they're working on. We all know about the success with the drone operations in the Ukraine war, as far as the drones providing an asymmetric warfare opportunity compared to traditional tanks and legacy military equipment. A company like this, Shield AI, is hoping to capitalize on this next version of warfare, which will likely involve drones and unmanned AI-driven type of warfare. Another one is Array Labs. They're doing 3D imagery. They are private. They recently, I don't know if they're still raising money, but they're certainly after private capital. They just announced a contract with the U.S. Air Force. So even though these companies are private and raising money from private investors, they are actively working with U.S. government entities such as different arms of the U.S. military. I found this website here, which is called militarystartups.org. I don't know anything about this site other than to say it has a pretty good list of companies that you can check out. It says top 100 military startups. Looks like it was updated a couple weeks ago. This gives a good overview of what is actually out there. There are literally hundreds of these types of startups. So if you're looking for interesting investing opportunities, this is a cool website to check out what people are doing. And again, if you think about traditional bombs, bullets, tanks, airplanes, this list of companies may change your mind just because there are so many technologies that can be applied to warfare but aren't traditionally thought of as warfare type companies. I'm going to end this with an article that I wrote. You can go to my website, codyshirk.com. I wrote this in 2017, so it seems pretty outdated, and the title is Want to be a War Dog Investor. There's a ton of money to be made. And I go over the process of becoming a War Dog investor. There's a movie called War Dog. You should definitely check it out if you've never seen it. It's with Jonah Hill. It's not a comedy, although there is some pretty funny situations. It's the story of how these two people get huge military contracts. And the article that I wrote here explains the whole process, where expenses go, what the military does, what kind of budgets are involved. And again, even though this article I wrote in 2017 seems old, it's absolutely applicable to right now in 2024. And the most interesting thing about this article is that there are links on here that are still relevant, specifically referring to the contracts that the U.S. military has out that individuals and companies can bid for. So it's quite an interesting business and investing opportunity. So I'll end it there and just mention that I'm going to be staying on this topic for quite some time. I still think it's a huge upside in defense investing. It's not the sexiest environment or industry to be involved with because war does not feel comfortable for most investors. But as the world moves forward with more conflict, this industry is highly likely to be very relevant for quite some time. All right, see you guys.